It was 1979, and backstage at the Troubadour in Los Angeles, a young assistant was running through the corridors looking for the show's promoters. The message was urgent. Linda Ronstadt had walked out of her dressing room again. There was no stage fright involved, no broken equipment, no technical issue of any kind. Linda had simply looked at the printed schedule for the evening, noticed one specific name on it, and that was enough. Not her name, not the Eagles, his. For the next several decades, Linda never once explained what really happened that night or why that name on a piece of paper was enough to make her leave. Every interview she gave, she stayed calm and polished. She never let anything slip. She was always diplomatic and always guarded. But now, after all these years of staying silent, she has finally begun to open up about the musicians who hurt her, the clashes that happened where no cameras were rolling, and the experiences that cut far deeper than any magazine headline ever captured. And the most surprising thing about what she has revealed is that the story looks almost nothing like what people would have expected. This is the story of Linda Ronstadt and 7 musicians she came to deeply resent. The ones she fought with, the ones who let her down badly, and the egos that left wounds she carried for years. If you enjoy stories like this one, the real behind-the-scenes lives of music legends, the feuds that never made the front page, and the truths that got buried under decades of careful public relations, go ahead and subscribe right now. Click the bell so you never miss a video. We cover stories just like this one all the time, and some of them are even harder to believe than this. Now, back to Linda. To really understand what she was dealing with and why these experiences hit her the way they did, you have to picture the world she was working in. The late 1960s music scene was electric and exciting, but it was also a world that was almost entirely run by men. The clubs were smoky and loud, the energy was raw, and women in rock music had to fight constantly just to be taken seriously. Linda was doing exactly that, building her career with genuine talent and fierce determination when she first crossed paths with one of the most unstable and unpredictable figures of that entire era, Jim Morrison of The Doors. Their paths crossed in 1968 when The Doors were at the absolute peak of their fame, and Morrison had already become notorious for being brilliant but wildly out of control. The encounter happened at a private after-party held near the famous Whiskey A Go-Go on the Sunset Strip. Morrison, who had been drinking heavily and was in full-on reckless mode, suddenly pulled Linda up onto the stage with him. What seemed at first like a spontaneous, high-energy rock and roll moment collapsed almost immediately. Right there in front of everyone watching, Morrison tried to kiss her, then lost his footing and fell into her microphone stand. Nobody took a photograph, but the people in that room never forgot what they saw, and word got around quickly. Linda was wise enough to understand that stories get distorted over time. She was known to say that what people believe they witnessed is often just a version that someone made up in their own head and then passed around as fact. But this particular night was real to her, and she never let go of it. What made everything worse was what Morrison said about her afterward. In interviews, he described her as sweet but spineless. That stayed with her. Publicly, she never responded to it, but in private, she reportedly called him a brilliant wreck, someone whose personal chaos had a way of spreading and damaging everything and everyone in his orbit. To Linda, he was the perfect symbol of everything wrong with rock culture at that time. The excess, the arrogance, the assumption that men could behave however they wanted with no consequences. She spent her whole career pushing back against exactly that, and Morrison was the first person to put a face on it for her. As the 1970s got moving, the person who hurt her next was someone much closer to her, someone she had genuinely supported and helped build up from almost nothing. Everyone in the music industry knew that Linda Ronstadt had a direct hand in giving the Eagles their start. What fewer people talked about was the bitterness that grew out of that. Don Henley had been her drummer and backing vocalist in the early part of the decade. At that point, Linda was already a significant name in music, and she was the one with the audience and the credibility. Their early working relationship felt real and supportive. She helped give his career a foundation. But as the Eagles turned into one of the biggest bands in the world, something shifted in Henley. His confidence hardened into something less attractive. The band that had once opened for Linda was now acting as though they had always owned the whole scene. The moment things finally broke apart came in 1975, backstage at the Universal Amphitheater during a heated argument.
Henley told her bluntly that she should stick to singing covers written by other people and stay out of the real songwriting. That was the moment Linda drew a clear line. She did not just walk away from the argument, she had his backstage access completely revoked from her tour. He was no longer welcome. Word spread fast through the industry that something had gone badly wrong between them. Reports circulated that Henley had been telling people Linda was too precious and too delicate for proper rock and roll music. She, in turn, told people close to her that she saw him as someone who had sold out his own integrity the moment real fame arrived. For her, the whole situation was never simply about hurt feelings or bruised pride. It was about respect, and Henley had thrown that away entirely. Just as that particular wound began to settle, another conflict appeared from a completely different direction. Not every fight was about ambition or personal insults. Some went far deeper, into the territory of values and beliefs and what it actually meant to stand for something. The conflict with Neil Young was one of the most personally painful things Linda experienced. Both of them had strong public identities built around social causes and activism. Both were known for caring about justice and speaking out. On paper, they should have been natural partners, but a joint benefit concert for farm workers held in 1976 cracked that idea open completely. Young reportedly rejected any pop-influenced songs from the setlist and made clear that he considered Linda's catalog too lightweight and too commercial for a serious political event. People who were present that evening described him as dismissive and condescending, brushing her aside and taking full control of the situation without any apology. By the end of the night, Linda had left in tears. Young was said to have told reporters afterward that she simply did not have what it took to do protest music. That remark hit her somewhere deeper than most insults did. Activism was not a costume Linda put on when it was useful. It came from her background, her heritage, and her sincere personal convictions. To be dismissed as superficial by a fellow activist, by someone she had respected, felt like genuine betrayal. After that night, she turned down every single opportunity to share a stage with Young, no matter how important the event was. He continued to mention her in interviews over the years, typically in ways that sounded like praise on the surface, but carried a pointed edge underneath. In Linda's view, Young had come to represent a particular kind of self-righteousness, the type that was loud about its own morality while quietly cutting people down. Some of her most difficult experiences, though, happened inside recording studios, away from any audience or press. These were places where trust was supposed to be the foundation of the work, and where its absence was especially damaging. One of her biggest professional disappointments involved Frank Zappa. When they met during a radio appearance in Los Angeles in 1974, there was genuine curiosity on both sides. Zappa was known for pushing music into challenging and unconventional places, and Linda found that fascinating. She reached out about the possibility of recording one of his songs together. It seemed like it could turn into something genuinely interesting. It fell apart quickly. From the moment the creative process began, Zappa dismissed everything Linda suggested. He told her that her voice was too clean, too commercial, too pop, that working with her would strip all the edges off his music and turn it into something safe and radio-friendly. The tension kept building until one rehearsal session where he stopped the band completely mid-song, turned to everyone in the room, and announced loudly that this was exactly what happened when real music was handed to a pop singer. Linda walked out immediately and did not go back. She kept the full story to herself publicly, but in private, she described him as both genuinely brilliant and genuinely brutal. Some doors, she decided, were better left closed. The hardest wounds of all, however, came from someone who had been a real friend, not a rival, not a stranger, but a person Linda had worked alongside and trusted within the close-knit world of Laurel Canyon. Her friendship with David Crosby had been warm and genuine for a long time. They shared stages and studios throughout the 1970s, moving in the same circles and collaborating regularly. But as the decade wore on, David Crosby's increasing drug use and expanding ego made things harder and harder. In a recording session in 1978, something finally snapped. They were working on a harmony track together when Crosby refused outright to let Linda adjust the vocal key to something more comfortable for her voice. He insisted that she sing it his way, on what he called the real pitch, and the atmosphere in the studio turned hostile. The argument that followed was loud enough to become backstage gossip across the industry. Not long afterward, Crosby took subtle shots at her in a Rolling Stone interview, implying that her career had been constructed by record company executives rather than built on real artistic ability. Linda responded by ending the relationship entirely. She made it clear to the people around her that his name was not to come up in her presence. To her, Crosby had turned into a warning, a vivid example of what could happen to real talent when it was left unchecked and surrounded by drugs and yes-men. As the late 1970s arrived, the musical landscape was shifting dramatically. Punk and new wave were pushing their way in, and they brought with them a deliberately hostile attitude toward everything that had existed before. Linda found herself in the crosshairs of that hostility, not because of anything she had done, but simply because of what she represented. At a music festival in Cleveland in 1979, she encountered Elvis Costello, who was at that time one of the leading faces of the British-influenced New Wave movement. In front of a group of journalists, and without having ever had a conversation with Linda, Costello mocked her performance and dismissed it as nothing more than background noise for a weekend brunch. What struck Linda was not only the cruelty of the remark, but the casualness of it, the easy smugness of someone who had decided she wasn't worth real engagement. Later that same night, she found him backstage and confronted him directly. He was apparently in no condition for a serious conversation, and he threw another cutting comment at her before walking off. After that, Linda had absolutely no time for him. She saw him as representing a new and particularly cold type of nastiness in music, quick and clever with the insult, but completely empty behind it. And then, even in the early 1980s, when her reputation was at its height, another collaboration went wrong in a way she had not anticipated. In 1982, Linda and Paul Simon attempted to record a duet together for one of his upcoming albums. It looked, on the surface, like it could be one of those rare, perfect combinations, two of the most admired voices of their generation working on the same piece of music. But almost from the first rehearsal, Simon's famous perfectionism crossed into something more controlling. He kept interrupting her to redirect how she was singing. He offered constant, unsolicited notes on her performance. He even started suggesting changes to lyrics that Linda had never agreed to alter. What was supposed to be a genuine creative exchange between equals started to feel entirely one-sided. Linda told friends afterward that being in that studio felt less like making music with a collaborator and more like being called in for a lecture. No finished song ever came out of the sessions. Simon made no public statement about what happened, and Linda simply walked away with a private decision never to work with him again. For her, the issue had nothing to do with Simon's talent, which she never questioned. It was about whether she was being treated as a person of equal worth in the room. She wasn't. For a very long time, Linda Ronstadt made the choice to keep all of this inside. While the rock world played out its scandals and power struggles in public, she stayed focused on her music and her craft, and she kept her private battles private. She turned down opportunities to set the record straight. She chose her words extremely carefully in every interview she gave. She left an enormous amount unsaid.
But the truth was always present underneath, in the careful silences, in the invitations she quietly turned down, in the events she chose not to attend, and the stages she chose not to share. Opening up about these experiences now is not an act of revenge or bitterness.
It is something simpler and more valuable than that. It is clarity. Linda Ronstadt's career was not shaped only by the extraordinary quality of her voice or the remarkable range of her musical choices. It was shaped just as much by her ability to hold her ground when the people around her were trying to push her aside, dismiss her, or use her. She worked alongside some of the most gifted musicians of the 20th century, and a striking number of them treated her badly. She navigated an industry that routinely took from women while giving them very little credit. She stood her ground against men who confused their own noise and aggression for genuine substance, and she did almost all of it quietly, without making scenes, without running to the press. By telling these stories now, she is not just settling old scores, she is handing something real and practical to every young artist who has ever had their ideas dismissed in a rehearsal room, then told they were too polished or too commercial to be taken seriously, or been made to feel small by someone who spoke more loudly. She is saying, simply, that knowing your worth is not arrogance, that walking away from people who do not respect you is not weakness, that standing firm, even when it costs you something, is how you build a legacy that actually lasts. The real story of Linda Ronstadt has never been about the grudges. It has been about endurance. She met some of the most difficult, most inflated, and most damaging personalities in the history of popular music, and she came out the other side with her integrity completely untouched. That is worth more than any award, any chart position, or any sold-out show. That is the part of her story that deserves to be remembered most.